My name is Blair Barrett, and I was 32 the day my sister handed me a scratchy polo shirt with staff peeling off. 14 sorority sisters sat in a sunlit suite, drinking fancy teas and getting professional makeup done, flawless. I stood in a dark hallway, holding a cheap, stiff uniform meant for the catering crew. I was assigned a broken folding table placed next to the kitchen trash cans. The smell of rotting garbage was completely foul. When I asked Sierra about it, she gave me a cold smile. "You don't match the aesthetic." My parents told me to stop being dramatic. The catering manager shoved a tray into my hands, and by the time the speeches ended, my sister was sobbing in ruined silk because an old woman sitting nearby had been paying attention when nobody else bothered to. But we'll get there. First, you need to know what kind of family forces their eldest daughter to play the servant at a wedding. If quiet justice is your kind of justice, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and make sure to subscribe. I am a pediatric physical therapist. I own a modest therapy clinic in Austin that helps children with severe mobility issues learn to walk again. It is not a glamorous job, but I built it from nothing. I spent 4 years scrubbing sticky floors at an overnight diner and paid for my medical board exams myself. Every single $10 tip went into a rusty coffee tin for my tuition. My sister Sierra is 28, 4 years younger, and the absolute center of our family's universe. She has a practiced, perfect smile and a laugh that makes people feel like they are the most important person in the room. She was marrying David Wentworth, whose family practically owned the entire commercial banking district in Carmel, Indiana. Our mother, Donna, planned this wedding like a ruthless CEO, launching a hostile corporate takeover. Every folded silk napkin, every gold-rimmed dessert plate, and every handwritten calligraphy menu was calculated to impress the wealthy Wentworth family. I was invited to the wedding, but only because hiding my existence would raise too many red flags. I drove the 5 hours from Austin in my beat-up 2014 Toyota Corolla, ignoring the scary clunking sound coming from my engine. I always show up. I hold the heavy things so others do not have to. It is my best quality and my biggest curse. When I arrived at the Grand Country Club estate on the morning of the wedding, the air was thick with damp fog. The first thing my mother did was point toward a muddy florist delivery van. "Blair, the decorating team is short-staffed. Unload those 35 heavy floral boxes before you ruin your hair," she ordered, not even saying hello. I spent my first 3 hours at my sister's wedding sweating in the freezing morning air, carrying boxes that smelled intensely of wet dirt and crushed eucalyptus leaves. Before I could even wash my hands, Donna dragged me to the pre-reception VIP lounge. "Take their coats. Don't speak unless spoken to," she hissed. I stood in the corner, taking heavy cashmere overcoats and designer bags. An older gentleman with sharp eyes handed me his trench coat. His gaze dropped to my hands. "Calluses on the palmar fascia," he murmured, his tone analytical. "You do manual tissue manipulation, physical therapist." My heart leaped. Someone saw me, but before I could nod, Sierra materialized out of thin air, aggressively hip-checking me out of the way. "Oh, Dr. Ellis, pay no attention to her," she laughed, snatching the coat from my hands. "She's just temporary help, so clumsy." The doctor, who I later learned was David's cousin and a leading sports medicine physician, raised a skeptical eyebrow but walked away. Sierra turned to me, her smile vanishing. "Stay out of sight," she whispered venomously. While dragging the final 45-pound box up the stone steps, I almost tripped over a woman. It was David's great-aunt Martha. She was 78, with sharp, calculating green eyes, leaning on a custom-carved mahogany cane. Martha was a legend, but more importantly, I knew from old family stories that Martha and my late grandmother, Rose, had been childhood best friends and nursing school roommates before life pulled them apart. Martha offered me a monogrammed linen handkerchief to wipe the sweat off my forehead. She didn't speak, but her eyes scanned my muddy sneakers and tired face like a hawk reading a map. Later, I walked into the grand hallway. The bridal suite was overflowing with 14 of Sierra's college sorority sisters. They were given front-row VIP seats for everything. They were laughing loudly, drinking expensive imported teas, and getting their makeup done by a professional team. I asked Sierra where I should sit for the main reception dinner. She didn't even look up from her diamond-encrusted phone case. "Oh, you are not at the head table," Sierra said smoothly, tossing a piece of clothing at me. It was a cheap, scratchy black polo shirt with the word staff printed in peeling white letters. "You don't match the head table aesthetic. Plus, someone needs to watch the coats in the gift box." I stood there, holding the smelly, stiff polyester shirt, feeling my chest tighten. I walked out into the long, dark hallway. There it was. She had placed my plain cardboard name card at a broken, wobbly plastic folding table right next to the foul-smelling kitchen trash cans. The table barely stood up, leaning against the wall like a forgotten piece of junk. "Sierra, this is a staff uniform, and that table is by the garbage," I whispered, walking back to the doorway. Sierra finally looked at me, giving me a cruel, icy smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just wear it. You are better at working behind the scenes anyway." My mother Donna walked by, adjusting the lapels of her custom $4,000 designer blazer. I pleaded with her. "Mom, she wants me to sit by the trash cans and pretend to be an employee." My mother rolled her eyes, annoyed that I was breathing the same air as her. "Stop whining and just be helpful, Blair. Do not ruin this $120,000 day because of your jealousy." Before I could take another breath, Donna reached out and swiftly snatched my cell phone right out of my back pocket. "And I'll be holding on to this," she said coldly. "I know how you get when you're throwing a tantrum. You are not calling your little clinic friends to complain and ruin the vibe of this day. You are completely off the grid until tonight." She dropped my phone into her designer clutch and snapped it shut. I was entirely isolated. I swallowed the heavy lump in my throat. I stepped back into the hallway. Sitting on a chair was a gold-embossed wedding program. I opened it. Under the special thanks section, bold letters read, "A generous $8,000 donation has been made to the Pediatric Mobility Center in honor of the bride's grandmother, courtesy of the bride, Sierra Barrett." My vision blurred. That was my donation. I had written that $8,000 check from my tiny clinic savings account just 2 weeks ago to honor our grandmother. Sierra had secretly changed the name on the program to steal the credit for herself. I walked down the dim, quiet hallway, the rough collar of the uniform rubbing uncomfortably against my skin. Before I could even reach my broken table by the kitchen, there was a loud crash. A towering 6-tier crystal champagne pyramid was wobbling on a poorly built stand. Instinctively, I dove forward, catching the heavy glass table just before it collapsed. Sticky, sweet-smelling champagne spilled all over my hair and arms. My mother, Donna, marched over, her face turning red with anger. "You look like a wet dog," she hissed, grabbing my arm tightly. "Go hide in the public restroom and dry off. Do not let David's wealthy uncles see you like this." I nodded silently, walking toward the restrooms with my head down. This was my life. I was the family shock absorber. Let me tell you about my grandmother, Rose. She was not just a sweet old lady. She was a fierce, fearless head nurse. Back in 1954, during a terrible polio outbreak, she and her best friend worked straight through the nights, keeping children breathing in iron lungs. That best friend was Great-Aunt Martha Wentworth. They shared a tiny apartment, ate cheap canned beans, and saved lives together. When Grandma Rose was diagnosed with severe bone cancer, I was 25. I had just started my pediatric physical therapy clinic. Without a second thought, I moved into her dusty, drafty attic bedroom. For 3 long years, I rearranged my entire world. I crushed her pain pills into warm applesauce, I bathed her frail body, and I sat awake at 2 a.m. when the pain made her cry out. Sierra came exactly twice. Both times she complained that the smell of medical bleach made her nauseous, and she left after 30 minutes. Grandma Rose took her last breath on a rainy Thursday, holding my hand and clutching the silver stethoscope Martha had gifted her 45 years ago. I was thinking about Grandma Rose as I scrubbed the sticky champagne off my shirt in the restroom sink. When I walked back out, passing the velvet-roped VIP lounge, I froze. Sierra was standing with a group of David's cousins, including Dr. Ellis, the sharp-eyed sports medicine physician from earlier. She was holding a flute of expensive sparkling cider, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. I stopped behind a tall potted palm tree, holding my breath. "It was so incredibly hard," Sierra said, her voice shaking with fake emotion. "When my grandmother got bone cancer, I gave up my 20s to move in with her. I crushed her medicines, I bathed her, I held her hand until the very end. That is actually why I started my pediatric physical therapy clinic in Austin, to honor her memory." My heart stopped beating. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the hallway. Sierra wasn't just stealing the credit for the $8,000 charity donation, she was stealing my entire identity. She was stealing my sacred, painful memories of Grandma Rose. She was feeding my life story to the Wentworth family to make herself look like a flawless giving angel. "Fascinating," Dr. Ellis said, crossing his arms, his medical mind clearly calculating. "Pediatric physical therapy is grueling. What's your protocol for bilateral spastic cerebral palsy? Specifically regarding the dorsiflexion angle post-serial casting." Sierra's perfect, teary-eyed smile instantly completely froze. Absolute panic flashed across her face. "Oh, well, you know, every child is different," she stammered, her voice pitching up nervously. "We just stretch it out." Dr. Ellis narrowed his eyes, clearly smelling a rat. Just stretch it out? He repeated coldly. Right. Sierra excused herself abruptly, practically running out of the lounge. I gripped the edge of the wall, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march over and call her a liar, but I knew what would happen. They would call me the jealous, crazy sister. They would say I was having a mental breakdown. So, I swallowed the burning acid in my throat and walked away. The wedding ceremony took place on the rolling green hills of the golf course. Just as the music started, a freezing, misty rain began to fall. The 14 sorority sisters in the front row complained about their hair. My mother quickly shoved 2 massive, heavy golf umbrellas into my hands. Stand in the mud behind them and keep them dry, Donna whispered sharply. So, as my sister walked down the aisle in an $18,000 imported silk gown, I stood in the back, my cheap canvas sneakers sinking deep into the cold brown mud. My arms screamed in pain as I held the heavy umbrellas up for 50 minutes. But as the ceremony ended, something shifted. In the very front row, sitting under a grand white tent, was Great Aunt Martha. She slowly turned her head. She looked past the beautiful flower arches, past the wealthy guests, and looked straight at me. She saw me standing in the freezing rain, wearing a staff shirt, holding umbrellas like a servant. Martha's face did not show pity. It showed a terrifying, cold realization. Martha knew Grandma Rose better than anyone. Martha knew the truth. And as Martha locked eyes with me across the wet grass, she gently tapped her mahogany cane against the ground. The game was about to change. I decided right then and there. I would survive this massive, over-the-top reception, find my keys, and drive my beat-up 2014 Toyota Corolla straight back to my safe, quiet clinic. I just wanted my own bed. But before I could sneak away, the head catering manager shoved a massive, blindingly bright silver tray into my hands. Pass these out, now, he barked at me. Soon I was walking through the grand, echoing ballroom, balancing 60 greasy, lukewarm crab cakes, my muddy canvas sneakers squeaking loudly on the polished marble floor. My arms were already shaking from holding the umbrellas earlier. As I walked past the main tables, I saw Great Aunt Martha sitting perfectly still. As I approached her, she purposefully nudged her heavy embroidered linen napkin off the table. It fluttered to the floor like a white flag. I knelt down to pick it up. As I handed it back, our fingers brushed. She didn't say thank you. She just stared into my eyes with a look so sharp it felt like an X-ray scanning my soul. She was testing me. I quickly stood up and backed away toward a towering, dripping swan ice sculpture. That is when I heard my sister's voice echoing over the soft jazz saxophone music. Sierra was talking to the chief accountant of the Wentworth estate, a tall man with thin, wire-rimmed glasses. Oh, absolutely, Sierra purred smoothly, touching her sparkling diamond teardrop necklace. Building my pediatric physical therapy clinic was the hardest thing I have ever done. I actually paid for my medical boards by scrubbing sticky floors at an overnight diner. I saved every single $10 tip in a rusty coffee tin. It really taught me true grit and determination. The heavy silver tray in my hands suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My blood turned into ice. That was my clinic. Those were my blistered, aching hands scrubbing the filthy diner floors at 1 a.m. Sierra had never worked a single hard day in her life. She spent her college years taking luxurious, parent-funded trips to Milan and Vienna. Now she was wearing an $18,000 dress, selling my painful sacrifices as her own heroic backstory. I couldn't swallow the pain anymore. 15 minutes later, I saw Sierra slip into the cramped, dimly lit catering pantry to hide from the crowd. I followed her inside. She was staring into a tiny, gold compact mirror, reapplying her glossy, ruby-red lipstick. The air in the tiny room smelled strongly of burnt sugar and sour lemons. "You are telling David's family you built my clinic?" I asked, my voice trembling with raw hurt. "You told them you scrubbed diner floors?" Sierra slowly snapped her mirror shut with a loud click. She looked at me like I was a diseased rat that had wandered into her castle. Suddenly, she lunged forward, grabbing my wrist with shocking strength. "Shut up," she hissed, her eyes wild with panic. "Dr. Ellis is asking too many medical questions. He's starting to doubt me. The speeches are in 10 minutes, and David's father expects me to sound like a peer." She shoved a tiny, flesh-colored Bluetooth earpiece into my palm. "Put it on. Link it to the walkie-talkie app on my spare phone. When I'm talking to the medical family members at the head table, you listen. If they ask a technical question, you tell me exactly what to say. I am not crazy. I heard you claim my medical boards. And I am not helping you run this scam." I fired back, stepping closer. Sierra laughed a cold, dry, rattling laugh. "Look at yourself," she sneered, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my champagne-stained staff shirt and my messy hair. You are screaming at the bride in a storage closet. This is exactly why no one will ever take you seriously. You're going to feed me the answers, or I will make sure Mom cuts you out of the family trust entirely." She wasn't just lying, she was using my forced humiliation against me. Just then, the pantry door swung open. My mother Donna stepped inside and quickly slid the heavy brass lock shut, trapping me inside the tiny room with them. Donna looked absolutely furious, her face pulled tight with rage. "Whatever wild tantrum you are having, shut it down right now," Donna hissed, stepping so close I could choke on her overwhelming powdery floral perfume. "Mom, she is stealing my entire career. She is telling everyone she is a physical therapist, and now she wants me to wear a wire to feed her medical terms," I pleaded, hoping my mother would finally defend me just once. Donna didn't even blink. The Wentworths respect hard work, Blair. Sierra needed an impressive, self-made backstory to fit into their elite circle. Donna whispered coldly, showing zero guilt. "We simply gave them the story they needed to hear. Put the earpiece in, do your job." My chest felt like it was being crushed by an elephant. "And what exactly did you tell them about me?" I asked, dreading the terrifying answer. Donna smoothed the wrinkles on her expensive designer jacket. "We told them you suffer from a severe psychological inferiority complex. We explained that you insist on wearing that ridiculous uniform and acting like a servant because you are deeply unwell and desperately need attention." My mother Donna stood in the cramped, dimly lit catering pantry, looking at me like I was a broken toy she wanted to throw away. After telling me I was nothing but a psychologically unwell cover story, she reached over and grabbed a rough, scratchy dish towel from a shelf. Without warning, she forcefully scrubbed my cheek, her sharp fingernails digging into my skin. "You have a dark smudge on your face. Try to at least look clean for your fake shift," she commanded coldly, tossing the dirty towel onto the floor. She unlocked the heavy brass lock and walked out, leaving me completely shattered in the dark. But as she left, I looked down at the tiny earpiece in my hand. A dangerous, brilliant thought sparked in my mind. If she wanted me to feed her medical knowledge, I would, but I would do it my way. I could not breathe. I stumbled out of the pantry, bypassed the grand ballroom entirely, and pushed my way out a heavy metal exit door. I found myself on a freezing, rusted metal service balcony behind the kitchens. The icy rain was coming down in thick sheets. The air smelled strongly of wet asphalt and rotting garbage dumpsters. I leaned my weight against the icy iron railing, shivering violently in my soaked polo shirt. The heavy booming bass of the party music vibrated against the bottom of my wet sneakers. I was going to find my car keys and drive away forever. Suddenly, the heavy metal door swung open. It was David, the groom. He looked exhausted. He was rubbing his forehead and loosening his tight silver silk bow tie. I froze, expecting him to yell at me for ruining the family image. But he just looked at my staff shirt, my messy hair, and my pale face. He gave me a polite, tired smile. He did not recognize me. Why would he? In the 3 years he had dated my sister, Sierra had always made sure I was working, hiding, or conveniently cropped out of every family photograph. To him, I was just a random catering employee taking a break in the rain. "Rough night to be working out in this weather," David said kindly, leaning against the brick wall. "I'm sorry if my bride's family has been demanding. Sierra is just very heartbroken today. Her deeply troubled, estranged older sister refused to even show up to the wedding. Sierra cried all morning about it." My stomach dropped to the floor. Sierra had not just lied about my career, she had told David I wasn't even here. She dressed me like a servant so she could pretend I was entirely absent. David reached into his expensive suit pocket and pulled out a crisp, new $100 bill. He held it out to me. "Here, please take this tip. You are working hard and you deserve to be treated with dignity tonight." I stared at the money. My own brother-in-law was tipping me because he thought I was a poor waiter. I slowly took the green paper, my throat completely closed up with grief. He nodded respectfully and went back inside to his grand party. I stared at the rain-soaked $100 bill in my hand. It was the ultimate insult. I turned to walk down the rusty fire escape stairs, ready to vanish into the dark night. "I would not walk down those slippery stairs if I were you," a sharp, steady voice called out. I turned around. Great Aunt Martha was standing in the doorway, perfectly dry under the awning. She leaned heavily on her mahogany cane, her sharp green eyes locked onto mine. "You passed your medical board exams in the top 10% of your state class. You opened your pediatric physical therapy clinic on Maple Avenue in 2022. You signed the lease using $15,000 in cash that you saved from diner tips." She spoke with absolute certainty, like a judge reading a final court verdict. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "How could you possibly know my business lease details?" I whispered, shivering in the cold wind. Martha took one step closer. Because I am the primary silent investor for that commercial building, Blair. I read every single lease application. I know exactly who built that clinic. She reached out and gently touched my freezing shoulder. Her touch was surprisingly warm. In 1954, when the hospital power went out during the terrible storm, your grandmother Rose did not run away. She stayed in the dark, manually pumping the breathing machines for the sick children until her hands bled. She was a lioness. Martha's eyes softened for just a fraction of a second. You have her spine, Blair. Do not let them break it. Martha tapped her cane firmly against the wet metal floor. You need to come inside and stand by the main stage. You will want to be in the room for the speeches. Without waiting for an answer, Martha turned and walked slowly back into the warm, glowing building, leaving me alone with a choice. I stepped back inside the building, the freezing rain still dripping from my hair. Martha's final words echoed in my mind. I did not go back to the kitchen, and I certainly did not find a seat. Instead, I quietly slipped into the cramped, dust-filled audio-visual booth hidden at the very back of the ballroom. It was completely dark, smelling strongly of hot projector bulbs and burnt popcorn. Inside sat a nervous, 18-year-old lighting technician named Micah. He jumped when I walked in. "Hey, staff isn't allowed in here," he stammered, pointing at my shirt. "That's my life they're about to show on that screen," I told him, my voice trembling but iron hard. "I just need to watch." Micah looked at my tear-stained, pale face and silently nodded, sliding his chair over to give me a view. I hid behind the heavy, suffocating velvet curtains, looking out over the grand party through a small glass window. I placed Sierra's Bluetooth earpiece into my right ear, syncing it to the provided walkie-talkie device. Beside me on a metal desk, next to a glowing control panel, was a crumpled, glossy folder left behind by the wedding planner. The label read, Sierra's Charity Presentation. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a piece of paper with a fake hospital letterhead. It was a forged receipt claiming Sierra had personally donated $8,000 to the Pediatric Mobility Center. At the bottom was a forged signature in messy blue ink. My stomach twisted into painful tight knots. She had actually printed fake documents to prove she was me. Through the earpiece, I suddenly heard the muffled voice of David's father, the famous orthopedic surgeon, speaking to Sierra at the head table. "Sierra, my dear, Dr. Ellis was telling me about your clinic. Tell me, what is your preferred modality for addressing pediatric muscular dystrophy progression?" Silence. Then, Sierra's panicked whisper echoed in my ear. "Blair, tell me what to say right now." My chest tightened. The lights dimmed. 5 minutes. I had 5 minutes before she stole my life completely. I pressed the talk button. "Tell him," I whispered coldly into the mic, "that you rely heavily on aggressive corticosteroid myopathy induction to reverse the atrophy." "I rely heavily on aggressive corticosteroid myopathy induction," Sierra instantly parroted to the famous surgeon, wanting to sound incredibly smart. I smiled in the dark. Corticosteroid myopathy isn't a treatment. It's a severe, damaging side effect of steroid overuse. It causes muscle weakness. It doesn't cure it. Any real doctor would know that. I had just loaded the gun. Suddenly, the ballroom lights went completely black. The crowd gasped in excitement. Above the main stage, massive, giant, floor-to-ceiling LED screens flickered to life. Dramatic, weeping violin music blasted through the expensive speakers. The screen showed stock footage of a sparkling clean pediatric clinic, followed by pictures of Sierra posing sadly in front of various hospitals. A deep, echoing narrator began to speak over the fake, emotional voiceover. "Sierra Barrett, a woman of incredible sacrifice," the video announced. "When her beloved grandmother fell ill, Sierra gave up her youth. She became a beacon of light in the darkest times. Today, she runs her own clinic, helping paralyzed children walk again." I stood in the dark booth, my blood boiling like a kettle left on the stove. She was stealing my exhausted, sleepless nights. She was erasing the years I spent sleeping on a horrible attic floor just to care for the woman I loved. I felt a sharp shooting pain in my jaw from grinding my teeth so hard. I wanted to smash the control panel. I wanted to rip the wires out of the wall and plunge the entire wedding into darkness. But I remembered Grandma Rose's iron-strong spirit. Grandma never threw tantrums. She fought with quiet, undeniable truth. So, I clutched my stomach to fight off a sickening wave of nausea, and I refused to let a single tear fall. I simply stood perfectly straight in the shadows, watching the horrifying movie play out. When the 5-minute video ended, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. People were openly sobbing. Then David's father, a famous orthopedic surgeon, stood up at the head table. He began clinking a silver spoon against his crystal glass to silence the room. He grabbed the microphone, his booming, authoritative voice filling the massive space. "I have been a doctor for 35 years, David's father proudly declared, looking lovingly at Sierra, though I could see a deep, troubled furrow forming on his brow after her earlier medical statement. It is rare to meet a young woman with such pure medical dedication. Sierra, you are a true medical peer. You are a brilliant, dedicated physical therapist. The Wentworth family is incredibly proud to have another healer in the Wentworth family." Every single word was a stab to my heart. I adjusted the scratchy staff collar of my wet uniform, my wet canvas sneakers squeaking softly on the booth's metal floor. I looked out into the glaring, blinding stage lights. Below them sat a sea of clapping, wealthy guests. At the front table, I saw Sierra wiping a fake, perfectly timed tear from her cheek. Her shimmering diamond earrings caught the light as she smiled, smirking like a victorious queen who had just successfully robbed a kingdom. But my eyes drifted to a smaller table on the right side. Martha sitting like a stone statue, completely unaffected by the emotional music and the crying crowd. Her heavy mahogany cane resting on her lap, she was staring directly at the bride. Martha had a calculating, hawk-like gaze that missed absolutely nothing. I felt my breath catching in my throat. The air felt as thick as peanut butter. Martha had promised me I would want to be in the room for what happened next. She was ready for the final explosion, and for the first time all day, I felt a tiny spark of hope ignite in my chest. The room was still vibrating from the deafening roar of applause. Up on the main stage, David's father was smiling proudly at Sierra, completely unaware that he had just praised a total fraud. I stood in the dark booth, the sweat dripping down my neck, feeling like the weight of the world was crushing my lungs. Then Martha made her move. She did not wait for the applause to die down. Martha stood up, ignoring her wealthy family members. She walked straight up to the heavy iron-wrought microphone stand. With one swift motion, she struck the metal pole with her heavy mahogany cane. The impact sent a shrill, ear-piercing screech of feedback through the massive speakers. The DJ panicked and slammed his hands on the soundboard, cutting the music instantly. A dead, heavy silence fell over the extravagant ballroom. 250 guests stopped breathing. Martha did not speak into the microphone. Instead, she turned and stomped her mahogany cane against the wooden stage. She lifted her cane and pointed it like a loaded shotgun straight past the sea of tables, aiming directly at the back of the room. Aiming at the AV booth. "You," Martha commanded, her voice cutting through the quiet room. She looked up at Micah, the terrified teenage lighting technician sitting in the balcony beside me. "Micah, check your email. Pull up the digital registry document I just forwarded you. Cast it to the main screen. Now." Micah's fingers flew across the keyboard. He looked at me, gave a sharp nod of solidarity, and slammed the enter key. A second later, a massive, blinding white spotlight swung across the ceiling and slammed into the dusty glass window of the AV booth, while the giant LED screen behind the stage flashed from Sierra's face to an official National Health Licensing database. I was exposed like a captured criminal. 250 wealthy guests gasped in collective shock. There I was, standing behind the glass in my shivering, soaked staff polo shirt, with my messy hair and pale face. My stomach plummeted like a falling elevator. My first instinct was to drop to the floor and hide. But then I remembered Grandma Rose's fierce courage. She had pumped breathing machines in the dark until her hands bled. She never hid from the truth. I lifted my chin, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the dark shadows. I pushed open the heavy metal door and walked out into the open ballroom, my squeaking canvas sneakers echoing loudly on the marble. I marched down the center aisle, completely ignoring the horrified stares of the Wentworth family. I stopped right at the edge of the stage, looking up at Martha. Martha gave me a single, respectful nod. Then, she pointed her cane up at the massive LED screen. "My grandson's beautiful bride has just claimed she owns a medical clinic," Martha said loudly to the crowd. "She claims she scrubbed diner floors to pay for her medical exams, but I am a woman who checks the digital footprints." Martha turned to David's father, the famous orthopedic surgeon, whose eyes were already glued to the glowing screen. "Read the registered owner's name," Martha ordered, her voice as cold as a winter blizzard. David's father looked confused. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and stared at the digital state seal. He cleared his suddenly dry throat. "The registered owner and licensed pediatric physical therapist is Blair Barrett," he read aloud. His voice echoed like a thunderclap across the silent room. He dropped the microphone, looking from the screen down to me, standing in my muddy shoes. He stared at me with wide, horrified eyes. And furthermore, David's father suddenly boomed, his face turning dark red with fury, turning toward Sierra. Corticosteroid myopathy is a degenerative disease, not a treatment. I knew you were lying the second those words left your mouth. You have zero medical training. At the head table, my mother Donna froze like a broken statue, the color completely drained from her face. Beside her, Sierra clutched her $18,000 silk gown, her hands trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. Sierra's perfect, confident smirk melting into pure panic. Martha looked down at Sierra, her eyes blazing with fury. The woman who scrubs floors, the woman who passed her medical exams, the woman who sat with Rose until she died, is standing right here in a wet staff shirt. For the first time in my entire life, I did not feel small. As the entire room stared at me, I finally felt a warm, healing fire spread through my chest. The truth was finally out, and I did not have to carry the heavy weight of their lies ever again. The entire ballroom felt like it was holding its breath. Up on the stage, David stared at the official medical license blasting on the giant screen. I realized I was still gripping the crumpled, glossy folder from the AV booth. I marched up the 3 wooden steps, ignoring my wet shoes, and slammed the folder down onto the white silk tablecloth right in front of the groom. "Look at the charity receipt," I told David, my voice surprisingly steady. David ripped open the folder. He pulled out the fake hospital letterhead. He held it next to the real gold-sealed license his father had just read. He compared the signatures. The realization hit him like a physical punch, and his face turned a sick shade of gray. He realized he was marrying a monster. Sierra saw the trap closing tightly around her. She decided to play her ultimate victim card. She began gasping for air like a fish on dry land, throwing her hand over her forehead in a dramatic show. With a loud sigh, she let her knees buckle and collapsed onto the polished wooden stage, pretending to faint to stop the terrifying humiliation. She knocked over several expensive floral centerpieces on her way down. My mother screamed and rushed toward her, but Martha did not even flinch. She simply snapped her fingers. From the front row, a silver-haired doctor in a black tuxedo stood up. It was Martha's personal cardiologist. He calmly walked over to Sierra, knelt down, and checked the pulse on her wrist. The doctor stood back up and adjusted his glasses. "Her heart rate is perfectly normal," he announced loudly to the silent room. "Her breathing is fine. She is completely faking it." The crowd gasped in disgust. Sierra's eyes snapped open instantly. She looked exactly like a cornered snake. The fake, sickly sweet mask she had worn all her life was finally ripped away. She glared at the doctor with a sharp, venomous glare, her manicured hands curling into angry fists as she sat up on the floor. But Martha was not finished. She wanted the absolute destruction of this lie. Martha gave a sharp hand signal to the AV booth at the back of the room. Suddenly, the giant LED screen above the stage flashed bright blue. The romantic slideshow disappeared. Instead, thanks to Micah linking my phone number to the mainframe, a live video call popped up on the massive screen. It was Becky, the head nurse at my pediatric clinic. She was sitting in our break room, wearing her blue scrub top and stethoscope. Behind her, my entire clinic staff was cheering and waving. "Hi, Mrs. Wentworth," Becky's voice boomed through the speakers. "Thanks for setting up this call. We just wanted to say how proud we are of our real boss, Blair Barrett. She built this clinic from the ground up to honor her sweet grandmother. We love you, Blair." For the first time all day, hot tears of absolute relief spilled down my cheeks. The truth was surrounding me like a protective shield. I was no longer the crazy, jealous sister in the background. My staff, my hard work, and my true life were being celebrated in front of the people who tried to erase me. David stared at the screen, then looked down at the humiliated bride sitting in a pile of ruined silk on the floor. He gave a slow, disgusted headshake. He didn't scream. He didn't throw a tantrum. He simply reached over and slid the heavy platinum wedding band off his left finger. He walked over to the dessert table and tossed the ring straight into the bubbling chocolate fountain. It sank to the bottom like a heavy stone. "We are completely done," David whispered, his voice echoing through the microphone on the table. He took off his tuxedo jacket and threw it over a velvet chair. He looked like a hollow, empty shell of a man. Donna jumped forward, a frantic, desperate mother trying to save a sinking ship. She grabbed David's arm with her sweaty, shaking palms. "David, please, think of the press. You are ruining our brand. She was just trying to impress you." David ripped his arm away from Donna, knocking over a glass and leaving dark red wine stains across the white cloth. "She wasn't trying to impress me," he said coldly. "She was stealing my life's work, taking her own sister's identity, and turning my wedding into a scam." Martha tapped her cane twice, sending an icy, terrifying silence across the guests. The glittering chandelier lights seemed to shine exclusively on me. My chest was burning with righteous anger, but I had never felt so incredibly free. We had shattered the beautiful illusion, and all the wealthy, judging eyes in the room were finally seeing the ugly truth. The entire room watched in shock as David's platinum ring sank into the bubbling chocolate fountain. Sierra realized her perfect wealthy future was evaporating right before her eyes. She scrambled to her feet, the mud-stained hem of her heavy silk gown dragging behind her. She lunged toward the DJ booth, desperate to grab the microphone and spin another web of lies. But as she lunged, her silver stiletto heel caught in the delicate fabric. A loud, sickening tear of silk echoed through the silent ballroom. The side of her $18,000 dress ripped wide open, exposing the cheap, bright pink shapewear she had hidden underneath. She stumbled and fell hard onto her hands and knees. The humiliation did not stop there. In the front row, the 14 sorority sisters, her VIP bridesmaids, were staring at her with pure disgust. Tessa, the maid of honor, stood up. Her face was a furious, boiling red. "You lied to us too," Tessa screamed, pointing a shaking, accusing finger at Sierra. "You told us your sister was a dangerous criminal out on parole. You said she was forced to work the catering shift by her probation officer." Tessa forcefully threw her lavender satin bouquet directly at Sierra's feet. "Take off the solid gold friendship bracelets we bought for you, you absolute fraud." Before Sierra could even reply, another figure marched onto the stage. It was David's mother. She moved with frosty, aristocratic poise, her face set like stone. She did not yell. She simply reached down and unclasped the heavy, priceless sapphire choker from around Sierra's neck. "This family heirloom belongs to a true Wentworth," David's mother whispered with a disgusted sneer, "and you are nothing but a cheap thief." Sierra was weeping real tears now. Thick black mascara and snot ran down her chin, completely ruining her professional makeup. She crawled toward David, her manicured hands clasped in desperate prayer. "David, please. I only lied because I wanted to be worthy of you. I wanted to be special." David stepped backward, treating her like a highly contagious disease. Suddenly, a man pushed through the crowd. It was my father, Grant. For the entire day he had been a silent, useless ghost, hiding at the head table and drinking heavily. I felt a tiny, foolish spark of hope. Maybe he was finally going to defend me. Maybe, after 30 years of ignoring me, he saw the truth. But Grant did not look at me. He walked right past me, his shoulders slumped in shame. He knelt down on the wooden floor and wrapped his expensive suit jacket around Sierra's torn dress, protecting her. Then, he slowly turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were not proud. They were filled with bitter, resentful anger. "Are you happy now, Blair?" My father spat, his voice dripping with toxic blame. "You just could not let her have this one day. You had to show off and destroy your sister's only chance at a good life." The air rushed out of my lungs. The deep, agonizing betrayal sliced through my chest like a jagged kitchen knife. Even after seeing the forged documents, the fake video, and the terrible lies, my parents were still choosing the golden child. They were still blaming me. But instead of crying, I felt my shattered heart instantly seal itself back together with cold, hard steel. I felt an overwhelming wave of utter clarity wash over my brain. I did not need them. I had never needed them. I built my clinic with my own sweat, tears, and calloused hands. Martha stepped forward and tapped her cane. "Do not speak to this brilliant young woman like that," Martha warned my father, her voice echoing with terrifying authority. "She is worth 100 of you." I looked at my father, then at my weeping sister, and finally at my furious mother. I did not yell. I did not argue. I just gave them a slow, pitying smile, feeling lighter than I had in my entire life. The massive ballroom felt like a circus tent after the main act crashed. The romantic jazz music had stopped entirely. Instead, the room was filled with the chaotic sounds of whispers, gasps, and the clanking of furious waiters snatching expensive plates off the tables. My father was still kneeling on the floor, trying to cover Sierra's ruined dress, looking like a defeated general. My mother, Donna, was still trying to yell at me, desperate to regain control. But suddenly, the head catering manager stomped onto the stage. He was waving a bright red clipboard in the air, his face purple with pure, unadulterated rage. "Mrs. Barrett," he shouted into the ringing, dead microphone, his voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "The groom's family just informed my staff that they have canceled their payment for tonight. You owe us $30,000 in cash for this dinner, the bar, and the staff. And you need to pay right now before I call the police." Donna's jaw dropped, completely frozen in place. The wealthy, powerful woman she pretended to be vanished in a single second. Her perfectly styled hair was finally coming undone, falling flat and messy against her pale, sweating forehead. Sierra, hearing the threat of police, realized she was about to be on the hook for the massive catering bill. She panicked in utter terror. She grabbed a $400 bottle of vintage champagne from the bar and sprinted toward the kitchen exit. She thought she could just run away from the mess, leaving us to pay for it, exactly like she always did. But as she ran in her ripped silk dress, her foot caught the edge of a carpet, and she slipped on a puddle of spilled wine. With a loud, piercing scream, Sierra flew forward and crashed directly into the towering 6-tier vanilla buttercream wedding cake. The entire table collapsed under her weight. Smashed frosting and heavy cake layers rained down on her, covering her from head to toe in sticky white mush. She sat on the floor, weeping uncontrollably into a pile of crushed sponge cake. The crowd actually laughed, a cold, mocking, pitiless sound that echoed off the high ceilings. The Wentworth family had zero sympathy for a scammer. Seeing the disaster, Donna ignored her ruined daughter crying in the frosting and spun back to me. She was out of options. She lunged forward, grabbing my arm with her sharp acrylic nails, digging them into my skin. "Blair, listen to me," she begged, her voice sounding like a whining, desperate animal. "You have a successful clinic. I know you have savings. You can co-sign a loan to pay for this. Please, if you just give us the money to pay this man, we will finally treat you like family. We can start over. Just pay the bill, Blair." I looked down at her sweaty, wrinkled hand gripping my arm. For my entire 30 years on this earth, I would have paid any price, done any chore, and worn any ugly dress just to make my mother look at me like I mattered. I used to pray for her love. But now, standing in the ruins of her fake empire, looking into her greedy, begging eyes, I felt absolutely nothing. The spell was broken. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my arm, pushing her hand away forever. "I am not your bank, Mom," I said, my voice calm as a quiet lake. "And I am definitely not your family anymore. You are on your own." As Donna stepped back in shock, unable to comprehend that she had lost her grip on me, Great Aunt Martha walked over. The crowd of wealthy guests parted for her like the Red Sea dividing. She stopped in front of me. She looked at my messy, wet staff shirt and smiled a warm, genuine grandmotherly smile. "Blair," Martha announced loudly, her voice carrying through the silent room, making sure Donna heard every single word. "My charitable trust has been looking for a brilliant physical therapist to run a brand new 2-story pediatric rehabilitation wing at the city hospital. It comes with a $600,000 starting grant. I would be honored if you would be our head director. The children in this state need someone with your fierce strength and honesty." My heart soared into the clouds. The crushing, lifelong weight of rejection completely melted off my shoulders entirely. My mother and sister watched with eyes wide with envious horror as all that money, respect, and prestige was handed to the daughter they threw away. I looked at Martha, my eyes filling with happy, sparkling tears. "I would absolutely love that, Martha. It would be my greatest honor." Martha patted my cheek gently, exactly the way Grandma Rose used to do. "Good girl. Now get out of this ridiculous shirt and drive safely back to Austin. You have real work to do tomorrow." I turned my back on the chaotic, frosting-covered disaster of a wedding. As I walked proudly out of the grand double doors, the angry catering manager was standing by the exit, furiously typing on his phone. I stopped, pulled the scratchy black staff polo shirt over my head, leaving me in my comfortable soft gray tank top, and handed the smelly uniform directly to him. "Here is my resignation," I told him with a light, breezy laugh. He looked shocked for a second, but then he actually smiled and nodded at me with deep respect. I walked out into the crisp, clean night air, climbed into my reliable, beat-up Toyota Corolla, and drove away. I didn't blast the radio. I didn't cry. I just listened to the peaceful hum of the engine, feeling like a heavy steel chain had been unlocked from my ankles. I was finally free. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my bright, sunny clinic office when my phone buzzed. It was a long voicemail from my mother, Donna. Her voice was no longer commanding. It was weak, shaky, and full of panic. She cried that the country club was suing them for $50,000 in damages because Sierra had destroyed the cake and ruined the expensive vintage rugs. She begged me to call her back. She whined that Sierra was now forced to work the late-night drive-through shift at a local fast-food burger joint just to slowly pay off her massive credit card debts. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad or guilty. I just pressed the bright red delete button, erasing them from my life permanently. I blocked both of their numbers. Suddenly, Becky, my head nurse, knocked on my door. "Come out to the waiting room, boss. We have a surprise," she said with a huge, secretive grin. I walked out into the lobby. My entire staff was standing there, holding a beautifully wrapped rectangular gift. "We wanted to give you this," Becky said softly, handing it to me. I opened it carefully. It was a custom glass shadow box. Resting on a bed of blue velvet was Grandma Rose's silver stethoscope. Next to it was a tiny bronze plaque that read, "To Blair, who carries the healing hands of her grandmother." I covered my mouth as thick, happy tears blurred my vision. Becky wrapped her arms around me in a tight, crushing bear hug, and soon the whole team joined in. This was my real family. These were the people who respected my hard work. 8 months later, the big day arrived. We stood outside the massive glass doors of the brand new pediatric rehabilitation wing at the city hospital. The warm morning sun shined down on a crowd of doctors, parents, and smiling children. Standing right beside me was Great Aunt Martha, leaning on her familiar mahogany cane. Martha looked at me with eyes full of immense pride, completely stepping into the role of the grandmother I had lost. She reached out and squeezed my hand firmly. "Rose would be so incredibly proud of you today, Blair," Martha whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You built this with truth." At the front of the crowd, a little 8-year-old boy named Tyler, who we had been helping with daily therapy for a year, let go of his walker. With a giant smile, he took his first 3 shaky steps on his own. The crowd cheered, clapping loudly for his bravery. I looked up at the bright blue sky, knowing Grandma Rose was watching over all of us. You cannot choose the family you are born into, but you can absolutely build a beautiful, unbreakable family out of the people who truly see your worth. When people try to push you into the shadows and dress you like a servant, remember this: the truth is a blazing spotlight. You just have to be brave enough to stand in it. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is simply share that truth with the world. There is a profound healing power in stories like this one, narratives that strip away the heavy illusions we are forced to carry and celebrate the quiet, undeniable strength of the human spirit. If you felt the raw intensity of this journey, if your heart cheered for the moment the spotlight finally illuminated the right person, then you already know how deeply a real story of vindication can resonate. You do not have to carry the heavy things alone anymore. If you want to keep standing in the light and experience more stories rooted in resilience, profound justice, and hard-won truths, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Consider it an invitation to join your own chosen family of listeners and storytellers. There is always a seat saved just for you here, far away from the shadows.